I represent probably the most diverse district in Kentucky. It's Franklin, Owen, Carroll, Gallatin, Southern Boone, and Southwest Kenton. Some of the most liberal and most conservative split between that territory. So I represent the gamut of Kentucky.
And if you live in a area where Senator Williams is your state senator, would you identify yourself so that we can? All right. So you've got a number of constituents here, Senator Williams. Okay, so we're going to jump into the panel. And Les, I want to start with you. And I know you've got some information to share with us, but the topic of this panel is protecting kids online. And some of our guests may be curious as to why an opponent of predatory gambling would be included on a panel about protecting children. So why don't you take a few minutes, tell us about what you do, and tell us why parents and citizens should care about the harms of predatory gambling on individuals and also just on children.
Sure, so thank you. Good morning to everyone. And before I begin, I just want to take 10 seconds, and I want to recognize, I know he's going to be honored later today, but Kent Ostrander has been one of the best state leaders against predatory gambling in the United States, and I just want to recognize Kent for his work on that. And I also want to recognize someone who I deeply admire. I haven't seen him yet, but Attorney Stan Cave took on incredible litigation against these so-called historical racing machines, which are really slot machines, as you know, and just took it on. I admire you so much for what you did, and you'll always be one of my heroes, so thank you. All right. So people always ask me, Les, why are you so passionate on this issue? Like, I have been doing this now the last 16 years of my life. When I left my old career, like my kids were 4 and 1. And I believe so passionately in this issue of predatory gambling. I'm going to share a little bit. I only have about 5 minutes this morning to kind of share some of the key reasons why. But one of the things I want to emphasize, this is the core of it, is I come from the Boston area, with Boston Tea Party. When you live in second grade, you grow up, you learn, no taxation without representation. It's one of our core national principles. Today in America, pretty much regardless of your state, we have a system of taxation by exploitation. Okay, that's what predatory gambling is. It's not where you gamble privately. We have a system today of taxation by exploitation. And that's what drives me in my core. And I hope when we're done today, you'll kind of see what we're talking about, why it matters so much. The key is that we're going to talk about this later as well, like defining this issue. Like, what is gambling in America today? Because gambling has become so normalized, especially as it relates to kids. So what gambling is not, we've heard social gambling would be, the Catholic Church bingo game, the Friday night poker game. If you have a March Madness bracket, with the guys you went to college with, if you have a Super Bowl office pool, a friendly wager on the golf course, those are social forms of gambling. There's no house involved. No one's going to lose their home on it, and so on. So I recognize, some of our base is opposed to all forms of gambling, and I respect that. But I wouldn't be in this fight if we were talking about, just the Catholic Church bingo or Friday night poker game. So this is about a big-time corporate gambling interest partnering with the state. So when we say predatory gambling, at its core, and the big phrase is, we call it the big con, okay? It's the big con. It's when you mix a known, dangerous, addictive product, right? And that's not me saying this. That's the American Psychiatric Association that labels commercialized gambling as addictive as opioids, cocaine, and heroin. So you have a known, dangerous, addictive product, and you mix it with a fraudulent and manipulative financial scheme. Okay, so you kind of see that concoction. Those are at the top. You mix like highly addictive products like tobacco, opioids together with these major historical fraudulent schemes from the last 15 years that we're all familiar with. The cryptocurrency scheme that just happened a few years ago, and then the famous Bernie Madoff. Like, that's what we're talking about. This is a con. It's a form of financial fraud. Okay, and I also want to make clear, because I know this is a state with a big horse racing background. We're not talking about pari-mutuel racing. Pari-mutuel betting is a totally different world, okay? As wagers come in on a bet, I'm not defending, for those of you who oppose to all forms of gambling, I'm not saying it's a great thing or a bad thing. I'm saying it's totally different. Pari-mutuel forms of gambling are a totally different level. There's a spectrum here, okay? There's no house involved. Yes, the horse track makes money in traditional sports gambling, in pari-mutuel racing, but it's not like it is you're going against the house. So that's a major distinction between pari-mutuel racing and pari-mutuel betting versus lotteries and casinos and online gambling. All right. So here is a, I think that touch it. So what I just so you're clear on a definition of this, I'm happy to email my slides to anybody. We define predatory gambling as when state governments partner with powerful corporate gambling interests to exploit and defraud communities and citizens. That's what this is about. It's openly exploiting the public. And kids in America bear the brunt of this, okay? It's the only business where there's a predatory and adversarial relationship between the company and the customer. They're trying to take you down. You know, when I had breakfast here this morning, like, they're not trying to destroy me when I'm having an omelet here this morning, okay? The gambling operator, they're trying to take you for all you're worth, all right? And now we're gonna talk about Kentucky specifically and how it relates to kids in Kentucky. So, you know, this is a slide that I love to show. Every state has their version of this. So every state attorney general in the United States, you know, 30 years ago brought litigation against Joe Camel and the tobacco companies. But that was the image on the left brought incredible litigation from every AG in the country, okay, cartoon-like figures to market tobacco. Look what they're marketing. This is a Kentucky $5 scratch-off ticket from last year. They haven't put up the ticket for this year. That's a 2023 scratch-off ticket. They have Frosty the Snowman on a scratch-off ticket. Like, that's a government program. You know, so-called regulated gambling, okay? That's happening right here in your state, putting Frosty the Snowman on scratch-off tickets, a known dangerous addictive product. Who do you think the audience is for that? Okay? This is the next example, how we normalize gambling for kids today growing up in Kentucky. I'm a big Dave Ramsey guy, all right? I love Dave Ramsey. I taught my kids the Dave Ramsey personal finance principles, okay? Like, this is the public voice of state government in Kentucky today. Like, that's a scratch-off ticket that's marketed. That's a $50 scratch-off ticket, and it's called the Millionaires Club. So the way you become a millionaire in Kentucky and all these other states, it's not by practicing the virtue of thrift. It's not by working harder, saving more money, living within your means. Go out and buy a $50 scratch-off ticket sold in a state where citizens make $7.25 an hour at a minimum wage. Okay, that's when they market these tickets in low-income communities to low-income folks. You got to work 2 full days at a minimum wage job in Kentucky before you can lose it, okay, in 5 seconds on a $50 scratch-off ticket pushed by state government, okay? That's what kids see today. That's the message that kids are seeing today in our country, especially here in Kentucky. So this is just, so Kentucky also has, you know, we're going to talk a little about online today. This is kind of bringing this back to this form. Online gambling today is like, they're coming after your families. Like, this is hitting middle class and upper class families today in a way that other forms of predatory gambling have not. So you can go on the Kentucky Lottery website today. This morning I took snapshots of these. Look at them. Like, one is like little ladybugs, okay? The next one, the top one is castles, okay? Castles. The second one is pirates and planks, okay? Who do you think the cartoon-like figures, who do you think the demographic is for that? And you can start those games for free. Try for free. There's no age restrictions. Like, you can go on those games. That's a government program doing that, okay? So that's what we got to do. We talk about, you know, predatory gambling today. It's coming into your living rooms, your grandchildren, your nieces and nephews, your own kids, okay? Next slide here, very, very quickly, is I just want, so that is there. Actually, that's actually, I'm done. That's my last, I'm done. So with that, I'll just summarize, you know, the aim of our organization is Stop Predatory Gambling. We're going to touch a little bit later on sports gambling, you know, because everyone sees sports gambling. That's why I emphasize the lottery piece. We all see the sports gambling ads today, which is normalizing gambling for you know, thousands and thousands of Kentucky kids. But this is your issue. You know, this is your issue if you care about the future of your state, your community, and so on. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here today, and I'll turn it back to you, Nick.
Yeah. So thank you, Les. Before we move on to our next question, Les, I've heard you share statistics about where casinos and these big gambling businesses get the majority of their profits. So, and that was a shocking statistic to me. So for those who don't know that statistic, where are these organizations making the lion's share of their profits?
Yeah, so again, we include predatory gambling as anything that the state is, any of these powerful gambling corporations that states partner with. So lotteries, regional casinos, electronic gambling machines, and now online gambling. So just very quickly, the business model is this. For state lotteries like Kentucky, they make 70 to 80% of lottery revenue comes from 10% of the people who play the lottery. Okay, that's the people who play this. So that's a tiny amount of people in Kentucky are contributing 80% of your state government profits that are coming in, okay? That's why they're selling $50 scratch-off tickets, to get those people to lose even more. When it comes to electronic gambling machines and regional casinos, they make upwards of 60% of their profits come from citizens who are addicted to the machines, okay? And with online gambling, and this was just recently reported in the Wall Street Journal. So the Wall Street Journal showed that the business model is even more extreme for online gambling, is that 70% of online gambling profits was coming from half of 1% of all users, all gamblers, okay? Like this is all a government program doing this.
Joseph, I want to turn to you for a little bit. You work with one of our national partners, Family Policy Alliance, and one of the primary focus points for FPA in recent years has been about protecting kids from pornography online. Kentucky has been one of the states to do just that, as you can see in this map here. Why are these protections so important? Why should we care about them?
Yeah, this is such an important question for our times, Nick, so I'm so thankful for the opportunity to answer it. And before I do, I just want to thank David and Nick for the honor it is to steward your platform here, especially alongside these great guests. It's an honor to be here and be in front of all of you, so thank you for that. I want to make sure I honor the right people. But like I said, this is a question for our time. So we're going from gambling to pornography. Isn't this a great panel, you guys? It's a great Saturday morning. It's going to get a little bit darker for me really quickly, and I promise you it's going to get better when I talk about this map. So here's why it's going to get a little bit worse. Is I have to start with awareness. So the pornography industry is probably one of the largest and most nefarious forces in global cultural life, not just America, global cultural life, because of the advent and the rise of technology, which I want to emphasize at the outset. Technology is amoral neutral. At least theologically, that's how I approach it. I think it's how a lot of Christians approach it, which means that what matters is how you use it. Technology, as you'll hear, is what's protecting kids from pornography now, or being able to be used to protect kids. But it's what has enabled the dramatic rise of pornography consumption around the world, but especially here in the West, where pornography is more accessible. So, like I said, this industry thrives on lack of awareness. So I'm going to give you some very startling research here. And if you're startled by this is shocking, or it's the first time you've ever heard it, I want you to know you shouldn't feel bad about that, because that's the other side's entire game plan. When you bring these truths into the light, we can start to create the environment for miracles like this map here. So what I want to start with by saying is this is not your daddy's world of pornography. It's because of the rise of technology, almost all pornography is now consumed online, and mostly through your smartphones or your personal devices. People aren't going to 7-Eleven to buy Maxim. People aren't going to dirty bookstores to buy dirty books anymore. It's all done online. It's all for free. So here's the research that's shocking when it comes to children. The average age of first exposure to pornography right now is between 7 and 13 years old. I mean, the average age of first exposure, the first time anyone ever sees pornography, is as young as 7 years old, and as late as 13, but certainly not later than that. And then by the age of 17, a full 75% of everybody under the age of majority has been exposed to it. And most of those individuals, about 60%, accessed it unintentionally. So it's not like kids are getting their first cell phone at 8 years old and are trying to log on to one of the big porn sites. They're stumbling upon it. They're being accidentally exposed to it, whether through social media, or through their friends sending it to them, or they're just natural kid curiosity on the internet. When it gets worse, I'm sorry. Most of those pornographic videos, about almost 90%, depict some kind of sexual violence. So most porn online depicts some kind of sexual violence and verbal abuse. And then the research further indicates in an even more nuanced fashion that kids are actually believing that that's an accurate depiction of sex. So what they're seeing on pornography, this violent version of sexuality, they think that's what real sex is. And beyond that, we also know that pornography is as harmful to any brain, much less a younger brain, as a hard drug or an opioid. So our allies at the National Center on Sexual Exploitation funded a brain scan study a few years ago. And they scanned a healthy brain. They analyzed scans of a brain that was on heroin and a brain that was on pornography. And I'll give you one guess as to which brains looked similar. there was virtually no distinction between the brain scan of a heroin user and a pornography viewer. And we also know the worst part of the research is that harm done by pornography, the same harm done as opioid drugs, gets worse the younger the child is. So it's exponentially worse the younger they're exposed. So you add that to the fact that most kids are viewing pornography between 7 and 13 years old. Just imagine your 7-year-old using heroin if you're the parent and you don't know about it. That's what's going on. This is one of my favorite illustrations to do. I'll do this and wrap up answering this question, Nick. Is everybody hold up their cell phone if you have it? It's one of my favorite illustrations. I'm sorry, I have to put you all through it. Okay, I want you to imagine for a second that what this device does is it dispenses to you heroin in any variety you want, in any amount you want, for free, forever, as long as you're connected to a power source. When it comes to pornography, that's essentially what this is. That's why I stated at the outset that technology is a moral neutral. Because if I told you just that and nothing else, you'd all go chuck your phones into the little pond out there. But as you can see from this map, pornography, age verification for pornography actually works to protect kids, and we have research to show this. That map is a miracle. Do we have the picture of all the statesmen? So that's a picture from our conference this summer of everybody, the Statesman Academy and FPCs from all those 19 states. That's what a miracle looks like. Because when I give this research to a government hearing or something like that, this becomes a bipartisan issue almost instantly. So I've given you the reasons why, Nick, but this is where we can get to if we just talk about this. So the theme from this is awareness, understand this, and just talk about it.
Yeah, so we here in Kentucky are one of the states that has these protections, thanks in part to Senator Williams. So thank you for your work in that. Now, Joseph, there's a case that is headed to the Supreme Court on these issues of age verification. Tell us a little bit about that case and what we might expect from that.
Absolutely, and I'll be quick, 'cause I know I've already done a little bit over my time. The case is called Free Speech Coalition versus Paxton. That is the Ken Paxton, who's the Attorney General of Texas. He's only the party to the suit because the case revolves around Texas's version of this law. You'll notice Texas was one of those states filled in on the map. So this was a group that puts itself out there as a libertarian, free speech absolutist group, the Free Speech Coalition. I have testified in opposition to them in states that are a lot more challenging than this one, I'll say, and that's not what they are. They're basically a front group running cover for the pornography industry. So they lost at the Fifth Circuit, and the Supreme Court has decided to hear this case. This is, it's hard to overstate how dramatic this is from a Supreme Court jurisprudential standpoint, because for generations, people like us have been trying to do something about the impact of pornography on children. And at every chance we get, every time we think we have something, the court has struck it down because of their precedents where it guarantees adults have a right to access pornography. But the court's precedence is now working for us because there is part of that precedence is a case called Ginsburg. It was about a law in New York that basically required that if a bookstore was going to sell pornographic books to people, this is back in the 50s, they had to verify the age of the purchaser as being above age of majority. The Supreme Court upheld that law. So the Fifth Circuit gave us this great constitutional roadmap, basically arguing that these age verification laws are the 2024 version of that law in Ginsburg. Verifying your age online through the industry standard methods that we recommend. It's not just checking a box saying I'm over 18. You have to actually do it, but it's done safely and it protects user privacy, which we can get into at a later date. We're not here for that now. Just know that it's possible, or people like Senator Williams wouldn't have voted for this. This court basically ruled that the age verification online is the online version of in-person age verification. So if that's the case, then it passes constitutional muster according to the court's precedents. So the Fifth Circuit has laid this out for the Supreme Court in their decision, and the court's going to hear that this term. They know it's going to be one of their most controversial cases, which is why they haven't scheduled the oral arguments yet, but they will. It's going to happen sometime January, February-ish. Then we'll have a decision in June. It might even be the last decision of the year. Who knows? It's one of the 4 most controversial cases they're hearing this year. So that would give the green light to all these states, and I would venture to say we'd see another wave of these bills across the country if it was clear and obvious that the Supreme Court backed them.
Senator Williams, you have been involved in state politics for, I think you were saying, 35 years ago was the first time that you were elected to the General Assembly. So you've been in this game for quite a while. You're also an IT professional by trade. So talk to us a little bit about how you've seen the General Assembly take certain steps to protect kids online in recent years, especially for those of our guests who may not be familiar with everything that you all have been up to in Frankfurt.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I was shocked to see this was the 35th anniversary because the very next year that Family Foundation was formed, I ran, and I'm pretty sure they're responsible for the 43 votes that I needed to win that race, okay? And I knew Kent and Stan, they still have a head of hair unlike me, but it was pretty dark back then, okay? They've gotten wiser, I've just lost mine. So I was in for 8 years, out for 24 years, came back 2 years ago to a very different General Assembly. But it's interesting, we have a supermajority. It's still a little difficult to get to some of these bills to the floor. Age verification bill, the last one we did, everybody voted for it. You would have thought we might have voted on it sometime before the very last vote in the General Assembly that we could take. But we did, and I played a part in it, but it was really the Family Foundation, the other, those other organizations you all support that made the difference. I want to go back before age verification first is on 150 on the trans vote. This is the difference that you make, is we had a problem because we had a bill that was going to pass and was going to legalize sterilization of children. And actually, we had an amendment that 13 Republicans joined 7 Democrats, and it passed. But at 11:30 a.m. in the parking lot, the garage of the Capitol, there was me, one other senator, and David Walls, okay? And we went back and we called up some of these people that are here right now and said, what can we do? And I said, give me a bill that we can pass. That's when we got the South Dakota Amendment. But that's the kind of dedication they did. And the next night, we talked about the planning, getting out and turning on the votes. And it was you all's calls that made it happen, that we turned that around. We got the South Dakota Amendment passed. And I went home that night. Well, I was in Frankfurt. Went to sleep, got up in the morning, came in early because I knew things would be happening. There I met David Walls and his associates. And I realized they hadn't gone home, okay? They were there all night working to make sure that you all would get the calls going. And as soon as our South Dakota Amendment passed, the floor leader came up and says, does this mean the calls are going to stop? I said, yeah, I think so. So I played a part, but you all play a big part. And getting that communication at the right time is key. Age verification is no different. I won't ask you to hold it up, but how many people here have an ID? Yeah, raise your hand. I bet more people have an ID in their pocket than have a cell phone, okay? Because we all have IDs. You know, the myth that an ID is an infringement upon free speech and presenting it is just that, a myth. Because all of society has accepted the fact that when we go to the grocery store, there is tens of thousands of clerks trained throughout this state in how to look at that ID and verify if you're going to buy cigarettes or you're going to buy alcohol. You know, maybe nobody in here has ever done that, but that will happen if you do one of those. And if we think about it, the virtual world is really modeled after the real world. There's some differences, but in the real world, if you walk down even Bourbon Street, you know, you're going to walk down the street, and you're going to get some hint of what's going on behind these closed doors. And if Kentucky, you'll have hopefully less of a hint than you would on Bourbon Street. But you're not going to be able to walk through one of those doors without showing an ID. You're not going to be able to go to a bar. You're not going to be able to go to a porn shop. They are going to ID you in the real world. And there is no reason that we can't do the same thing in the technical world, in the online world. the virtual world. There is now a age verification providers association that has dozens of members that are the largest corporations in the world. And let me give you a hint. They already know how old you are. They know what you're talking about right now and where you are. This is not, I would like to say, this is not rocket science. This isn't a technological edge. This is what marketing is today. They know your age. They know what you buy. They know how to present, whether it's gambling or whatever other product you want. They're going to track you and do their best to get the most money out of you. We can use age verification to at least delay it for our children, to protect our children. And I think the General Assembly is very willing to do that. We did it for pornography this last session. I think that we'll be expanding that to social media as well. Age verification is the easy one. When we get into parental consent and some of those other things, it's going to be much more difficult. I got to figure out how to make that work technically. You know, there's some proposals, but age verification, we need to make that ubiquitous. That is the first step.
And when you need to make those calls again, we'll send you an email. All right? So, Senator Williams, speaking a little bit about social media, you know, you touched on age verification on social media, and we've seen a lot of reports recently about the harms that social media does to kids. Do you think that the General Assembly would really be willing to move in that direction? What do you think the hurdles are there? Because you're very pragmatic when it comes to what the General Assembly can do and what they can't do. So looking at it pragmatically, what do you think the roadmap is for the year ahead?
Well, the General Assembly, actually, there's a lot of special interest groups, or we're a special interest group here, right? We have an interest in having an America that reflects the values of Christianity and reflects us as being a good nation in order to be a great nation. But the generals, they have to be drug along. I think where we are with the industry technology people, I see a sense that they're okay with age verification. They know they can do it just as easily or maybe easier than what they do when you go into a bar and that sort of thing. So expanding age verification to social media and protecting our children, that is what we can do. Maybe parental consent, if we can figure out how to do that in our crazy world where, it's hard in the real world to figure out whose parents are of this kid or who has control or custody. That's a problem that we're all trying to deal with. It's even tougher in the virtual world. And yes, there are ways around it, VPNs, different ways, but back in my generation, everybody had a real fake ID. And so they also figured out how to look at those and deal with those. So you just have to deal with that. I think expanding the age verification. I do not believe we're going to, when I say is, you can't like AI. You can't outlaw a tool. Okay, what you have to do is deal with what's going on. And the next thing I think we can deal with, and there's some sense of, is protection of your likeness and your image. We're giving movie stars and sportsmen protection over their likeness and image. There's some pushback on this. But it's really hard to say that me as an individual, government officials have no protection for our likeness and image, but you all should be able to protect your license and image. You shouldn't have to make $1 million from writing a song just to be able to protect and keep control of your likeness and image. So I think that is the next step that we'll be pushing. And there's I've talked to a number of legislators. I think we will tackle that. I think the thing that we're likely to get passed is expanded age verification to other areas online and make a stab at likeness and image protection for you, the average citizen, or the teenage, or who did. I'm sure glad that none of this was around when I was a teenager, okay? And my heart goes out to this generation. But I'm a long-term optimist. I just want to close this, both on pornography and social media, said there is an anomaly that the New York Times just reported on. Is for the first time since they've been tracking this, there are more young men, the Gen Zers, in church than women of the age 19 to the 20s, okay? And these men are really guarding themselves, and they're looking for women to raise families and children. And so I am hopeful that in the midst of all of this, God gets his ways. God touches the hearts of our children and the hearts of the parents. So I'm a long-term optimist. I think we got a little tough sledding for a few years, but we'll get there, and that's a sign that gives me a great deal of encouragement and should encourage you all to keep at this hard work of supporting the organization.
Yeah. And I think especially as Christians, you know, Scripture trains us to have a view of eternity in mind. So I think there's a lot that we as individuals can be hopeful about as time goes on, even in a crazy culture like the one we have. Les, I want to turn back to you for a minute to touch back on the issue of gambling and children. You know, you mentioned Kentucky is a state with a long history of betting on the horse industry. We have legalized sports betting more broadly here in Kentucky. Now, with that history, the legislative steps that impact gambling in a negative way have been known to struggle in the General Assembly. But what are some ways that you have seen states take steps to especially protect children from the harms of predatory gambling? Because I know that you, with all the research you've done, you know that the tactics that they use are the same ones now that social media has picked up on. They've actually borrowed from the gambling industry. And so what are some ways that you've seen that have worked where states have combated these harms?
So let me just be clear that what we're talking about when it comes to predatory gambling is an extension of a government program. So pornography is outrageous and it's appalling, and we should be doing everything we can to stop it. But when it comes to gambling, it's only legal if you partner with the state. So that's what makes this even more extreme. So no state attorney general has ever brought consumer protection litigation against a gambling operator once they've been legalized by the state. So that just shows that what needs to change. So when we say specifically what needs to happen, I kind of give you that context because right now, no state has done anything on this stuff. It's open season. Every state in America, instead of protecting kids, it's bringing in more and more extreme forms of gambling. Because when you talk about commercialized sports gambling in Kentucky, FanDuel, DraftKings, and BetMGM, at their core, those companies aren't sports gambling companies. They're online casino companies. That's where the money is. So in a state like Michigan, where the gambling industry could ram through everything at once, 90% of the profits coming into these companies and into the state, 90% is coming from the online casino portion of the business. They use the sports books to get these young guys to sign up for the $1,000 worth of free bets and so on. And then once they get online casino legalized, they cross-market these young men to come over to the online casino, as well as women as well, getting sucked up into it. So the definitive answer is states haven't done anything on this. That's why we call predatory gambling America's most neglected major problem. And I'm here to pose to you that I'm telling you that predatory gambling is Kentucky's most neglected major problem.
And just to let you know, Les, and I didn't mention this to you beforehand, but those organizations that you mentioned, FanDuel, MGM, all of those online companies have actually just registered to be lobbyists in the state of Kentucky. So in case you think that it's not here, it's on its way. You can go to the LRC's website and you can look up, they now have registered lobbyists in the state of Kentucky that will be trying to talk to our legislators into expanding their operations or whatever they want.
It's about casino. It's about they want to open a Las Vegas casino on you. Joe did a good thing about raising everybody's phone. that phone is going to become a Las Vegas casino. Your grandkid's bedroom, every tablet, every iPhone, iPad, etc. That's what they're trying to do in every community across the state that has an internet connection.
And on top of that, I know that you've mentioned in other talks that you've given the significant rise in calls to gambling crisis helplines that are now being done by children and adolescents.
Yeah, I mean, you haven't quite seen it here yet because commercialized sports gambling is relatively new to your state, but like in the next 6 months to a year, like, you're going to see this. You're going to see this in your own families and in your churches and in your communities. And that is, across the United States today, we have an epidemic of young men particularly, but young adults and teens, kids, addicted to gambling. So in states like New Jersey, where they've had it for like 3 years now, 4 years, they have kids, like literally 16-year-old kids, calling these gambling addiction hotlines with their moms on the phone, okay? Like, that was never happening, okay? And these are middle-class, upper-class homes. These are your families. They're coming for you. Like, this isn't just, predatory gambling is affecting mostly low-income people. We build the casinos on the low-income folks. The slot machines are played usually by low-income people. Online gambling, it's affecting you regardless of where you live, how much it's coming for you. It's the public voice of government for our country today, all these forms of gambling. It's why we advertise to the American people more than anything else.
Joseph, since you work for one of our national partners, I know that you keep track of things that are happening in Washington, D.C. And early this year, there was some legislation that has been moving through Congress, COPA 2.0, an update to that, and then COSA. Talk to us a little bit about what the national government, the federal government is trying to do to help protect kids online, and why we should still care at the state level about introducing protections in state law.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's true. We do engage in all 50 states, the Family Policy Alliance, and we engage the federal government. We have a director of government affairs who lives and works on the Hill. So I actually to make sure I get this right for you all, I did a briefing with him yesterday on these two bills. So first of all, COSA stands for Kids Online Safety Act. It's this massive bill. It's like 200 pages that's designed to do holistic protections for kids online. And then COPA 2.0 is called the Children's Online Privacy and Protection Act. It's called 2.0 because they tried to pass a COPA in the 90s. They actually did, and the Supreme Court struck it down. There were a bunch of problems with it constitutionally. Their heart was in the right place. It's just that was never going to survive constitutional muster. So for clarity's sake, COPA 2.0 is inside COSA. And it's a little bit more popular. They've separated the COPA sections of COSA out into a separate bill. That one's a bit more popular and actually just got out of committee right before recess. The House side bill is a little bit more popular. But I don't think that one's going anywhere either because it's only more popular because it has less bite, essentially. And there are concerns with both. I want to say that at the outset. So FPA has not taken a position on either one just yet. We're hoping that we might see some positive revisions to certain parts of it. Like I want to say the heart behind both of these bills is excellent that we're behind with. We just have some significant concerns with a couple specific areas of drafting, and I'll give you just one so you can understand from our perspective. For example, there's a definition in it. Definitions are really important in legislative drafting. There's a definition for the phrase mental health, and it refers to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual with DSM-5. We take issue with that because we've opposed the other aspects of the DSM-5 in other issue areas like protecting kids from gender transition procedures. I know we're going to talk more about the LGBT agenda in the next panel. But just know we couldn't support a definition like that because we don't want to undercut ourselves in another issue area. There are other reasons to disagree with that as well, but just know that's one reason why someone like us, a group like us, might be withholding our support for COSA just yet. There's a chance that could get amended and we could throw our support behind it, totally. But just know different groups have taken different positions on both of these bills, and the jury's still out on them. There's something to watch, and that's the main reason why states like Kentucky should still be moving forward with as many protections as they can at the state level. The one piece of federal legislation I'll mention that we do unhesitatingly support is Senator Mike Lee's SCREEN Act. I don't know what SCREEN Act stands for. I'm sorry. I was in the Army before I had this job, and I couldn't keep track of acronyms then from the government, so I can't keep track of them now. It was enough for me to remember COPA and COSA. But the SCREEN Act is essentially, it's much smaller, more specific. It's just federally mandated age verification for for online pornography. So Senator Lee has a great advocate on this. His heart is in the right place, and the bill is really well drafted. So we totally support the Screen Act. Even if that passes, because it's so narrowly tailored, Kentucky should still move forward. Senator Williams, keep up the great work.
So we've got a few minutes left in this panel. One of the things that we at the Family Foundation have been talking a lot about recently as we approach this next legislative session is getting phones out of schools in order to protect kids online. And Senator Williams, I don't know if that applause has swayed you at all, but what's your sense of the possibility of being able to get phones out of schools to protect kids?
I think it'll be a good effort. I don't know if it'll be successful the first time around. But there is, the disruption in the classroom is a serious issue. I was talking to somebody who said that if a phone rang in their school, this was this teacher's rule, then that student, everybody around him would lose 10 points on their final grade. It got a little class participation to shut him down. He said it happened 2 or 3 times. He didn't actually take the points off, but they did have to buy everybody lunch or do something on that. So it was effective. I come from a generation, the safety issue is what the feedback is. I come from a generation that on Saturday morning got on my bicycle and rode 2 or 3 miles away, and Mom said, "Be back for dinner," okay, and had no idea where we were. The only thing she said is, make sure you keep your ID with you so they can ID the body, okay? That was, I don't know how many other mothers told them that, but that was, I kept that with me, okay? So beginning of ID. Today it's a little bit different, but I think we need to grow up. We ought to be able to go to school without your phone. But on the other hand, we're in a technological age for education. We really need to turn those devices into positive devices. They're neutral. The problem is, the reason they're on their phone is because they're bored in class. They're not being taught anything to some extent. That's one of the problems. Let's start teaching them. Let's start engaging them with education. I know I'm going off a little bit on this. But,
it's all right. Maybe we'll add you to the Amendment 2 panel.
Okay.
Great argument for school choice there.
Yes, we can go on to that. So I think we need to shut them down in the classroom, but we also need to really engage the kids and use those phones positively in education, because that technology can be used positively, and that's what we need to do. But don't be afraid if your kid's offline for an hour. That's fine. Yeah. Okay, it's not a whole day.
Joseph, what have you seen in other states as far as phones in schools?
Yeah, I want to affirm Senator Williams that this is a very noble goal that comes with some very serious challenges. And you've hit on, I think, all of them. I think the only one I would add that is an added challenge to this is the school safety issue. You know, a lot of parents feel like they want their kid to have a phone just as a safety precaution. And I think that motivation is understandable from today's parents. So it comes with some serious challenges, but in the end, your principle is correct, that kids should be able to go to school without their phones. Like, we should be able to get to that point. And I think it's possible. The enforcement part of it is key. I think if you're going to do it, it has to be enforced with an iron fist from every teacher in every classroom at every level of the administration. There's a local high school near where I live in Virginia that's doing this. Top to bottom, it's pretty much an immediate suspension not even if your phone is heard, if it's even seen. So that's how much you have to clamp down on it if you're going to do it. But I do want to reiterate that there's 2 other reasons why this is worth doing. One is that phones out of schools is so positively correlated in the research with positive learning outcomes that we just can't ignore that. Like you said, they're not being taught anything, which is why they're on their phones. Well, if you get rid of phones, you're going to have to learn something. It's not just that. There's all these other reasons why there's a positive correlation in the research. But also, I mentioned earlier the statistic that most kids that are exposed to pornography before they're 17 years old are exposed accidentally. One of those main avenues of exposure is their friends on their phones in schools. So if you remove phones from schools, you dramatically reduce the opportunities for kids to be accidentally exposed to pornography in any way, whether it's not even intentional from their friend, whether it's just on a school device or something. If you can reduce those opportunities, that is a good policy objective, as long as we're sober-minded about the challenges to get there.
Unless we've got evidence that shows us that there's kids in schools on their phones that are gambling in class, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you talk to any high school or middle school principal in a state that has had commercialized online gambling legalized for a year or two, like in school locker rooms, school cafeterias, school playgrounds, like kids used to collect baseball cards. All right, I was growing up, I used to collect sports cards when I was a kid growing up. Now kids are talking about, especially young boys, are talking about parlay bets and sports gambling and all that stuff on school property, and the phones are all contributing that because that's where they're getting their sports news. Every sports news now is just infiltrated with sports gambling-related content. So absolutely would help kids dramatically if we, I'm total proponent of getting the phones out of the schools.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, let's give these panelists our thanks.